Part two of the Fenway Rundown End of Season Grades podcast. I'm Chris Cotillo, Sean McAdam here as well. Red Sox with only 3 games to go, as you hear this on Thursday morning. 3 more against the Rays as they wrap up another lost season. And you heard us talk about the position player grades the other day. Everybody from Jaron Duran getting his A to Von Grissom and Danny Jansen and those guys at the bottom of the grades. Today we'll do pitchers, and we have a lot to get to. First things first, though, Sean, tell the good people how to subscribe to the Fenway Rundown Insider Text. If they don't know by now and they're active listeners, they could probably read the number back to you, but here we go.
Yes, just to make sure, you can join by texting the word join to 617-751-6257, then click on the link to subscribe. That will give you a free 14-day trial period. You'll get breaking news, lineups when they're posted, information about the team, ask us questions, supply questions for future mailbag episodes of this here podcast, and all for after your 2-week period expires a low $4.99 per month charge.
Thank you, Sean. So today, there's a lot of pitchers that have pitched for this team all season long. I think when we did this last year, we had an innings minimum, which when I was looking at it here, didn't really make sense to do it that way. So I kind of picked and choose. We're going to narrow it down fast at the beginning. There were 33 players who threw pitches for the Red Sox this year. We're going to eliminate 2 right off the bat. We're not going to talk about Pablo Reyes and Dominic Smith. Dom Smith was elite, but regardless, we're not going to grade him as a pitcher.
He would have
today.
a much higher pitcher grade than he would have for his position player grade.
Hey, he's a fan favorite. And then there's 12 guys that we are going to acknowledge, but we are going to give them incompletes. They are guys who either barely pitched or got hurt or were mop-up guys or are not here anymore. Here they are. Johan Ramirez, who apparently exists. Joe Jakes, who was very, very early on. Trey Wingenter, Rich Hill, friend of every program, but not enough innings to really get into here. Naoki Uwasawa, Isaiah Campbell, Chase Sugar, who's on the team right now, James Paxton, Joely Rodriguez, Garrett Whitlock, a big name, but we've covered him, and nothing's changed since we did our midseason grades. And then the 2 mop-up specialists, Brad Keller and Chase Anderson, who, if they were in the game, things were, not really worth paying attention to at a certain point. Those are 12 names, Sean. Some of them you remember, some of them you don't. Hill and Paxton and Whitlock obviously in there. We know the stories. Any of those names jump out that you want to touch on?
Chase Anderson was actually there, excuse me, for a while and did his job decently well for a while, kept them in some games, but when they pushed their luck and had him make a couple of spot starts, it kind of blew up on him. A good teammate, beloved by a lot of people in that clubhouse. Alex Cora sung his praises when he was DFA'd. I don't believe he got picked up anywhere, did he?
Yeah, he was on the Rangers. He got back to the big leagues.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But not much of an impact there.
I think he gets DFA'd again.
Yeah. That's the nature of the game these days, is that you're going to run through 25, 30, 35 pitchers in a season. And a lot of those guys were fairly anonymous. Some of them appeared in literally 1 game, 1 inning, and were gone. But a few of them contributed more.
Yeah, I want to touch on 2. Number 1, Paxton. I know he got hurt, and that was kind of a freak injury that ended his season and his career. As he told Rob Bradford, he's retiring. Just want to say, over the last 2 years or 3 years dealing with him, very, very nice guy, very pleasant guy, and wish him the best in retirement, because he is a good guy to cover and a guy who probably has a career in baseball, long after his playing career is done, doing whatever he wants, and obviously a pretty well-known name throughout his career. Injuries were always the issue there. I'll also say, we can't really fault Craig Breslow for that trade. It didn't work out. He got hurt. They gave up nothing. It was, I think, a logical trade. We'll get to some that aren't in a minute. But that's one mentioning. And the other guy of those, guys we're not going to give grades that I think stands out is Isaiah Campbell. Because when we talked in spring training and we talked about the roster projections, and we got 6 weeks of this guy is going to emerge and be a big part of this bullpen. Due to injuries and struggles, he finishes the year with 6 2/3 innings in the big leagues and 14 runs, 13 earned in that time. He's been dealing with all sorts of different, arm injuries throughout the year. A guy that there was a big hype train around early in the season who gave them absolutely nothing. I know Urias gave Seattle absolutely nothing. Sometimes we kind of go crazy over, oh my God, they got that guy for Luis Urias. And now you see why. He's a guy that could actually, be DFA'd to clear a spot in the offseason if they needed to, which, again, the hype train was real in spring training.
Yeah, there was a lot of excitement about him in spring training and the way he threw the ball. He actually looked pretty good in the first few weeks, but it went downhill quickly.
Yep. So those are the guys that we are not going to get into. There's actually two more we're not going to give grades to that I do want to bring up because they are brand new to the majors, good stories both, and worth kind of mentioning. Zach Penrod and Luis Guerrero. If the Red Sox are getting anything out of these last 3 weeks of the season, auditions, as we've seen, Kelly do it in the past. We've seen different guys come up. With these guys, I know Penrod struggled a little bit yesterday, but both of them, and especially Guerrero, have been super impressive. Guerrero, 7 2/3 shutout innings so far, 8 strikeouts, throws 99. The Red Sox have wanted hard throwers in the bullpen. We all know the story about the disability and growing up in Boston for part of it. A cool story there. And Penrod's been, pretty good too in 6 games, some big outs in Yankee Stadium. So we're not going to give them grades because it's hard to do that on a handful of appearances, though we will have Richard Fitz on the list later. But you know what? Give them the flowers for, kind of stepping up, and they're going to be in the mix for the bullpen come opening day.
Yeah, certainly Guerrero is. Penrod, there's a lot of lefties floating around. I suspect that, as Craig Breslow hinted, they're going to be in the market for a real frontline lefty reliever. If you assume that the closer role is going to be handled by Liam Hendriks, maybe Chris Martin comes back as the eighth inning guy. Maybe
Or Slayton in the ninth.
Slayton could fill either of those roles. As I wrote earlier this week, if Hendriks runs into any kind of obstacles in his comeback or Martin doesn't return, Slayton could have a huge role. But they're going to be looking for a premier lefty reliever. And I wonder about a lot of these guys, the Bailey Horns and the Zach Penrods, who look more like 4A guys, frankly. I don't know that they can be counted on as much, but I would expect that Guerrero will be very much in the mix, if for no other reason than the hop on that fastball. This is 2 years in a row where Alex Cora has wound down the year and pined for somebody who can get real swing and miss in the late innings, and that's a guy who can do it.
Yep. We won't spend much more time on them. We will get to a couple of massive disappointments in the bullpen to start our official grades. We're going to grade 17 pitchers now. The first of them, Sean, is one Luis García. I know he's back and pitching, but so far in 13 and a third innings for the Red Sox, 21 games. His ERA is just under 9. He got hurt for a while. And if you look at disastrous trade deadline acquisitions, it doesn't matter really what the other 4 guys that he was traded for do. I don't think any of them are going to be world beaters. We've seen that kind of play out in Anaheim. Disaster, F, and that might be generous. Seems like a nice guy. No other way to put it.
Yeah, real nice guy with an interesting story. Took a couple of years off from baseball, came back, and has gotten himself a nice long career. He's pitched in the big leagues about a dozen years, moved around with the Rangers, the Phillies, the Angels, all over the place. But he was disastrous after a first couple of strong outings. I think he allowed runs in like 7 of his last 8 and really put them in a bad spot in August when the bullpen was flailing and failing. Straight F for Garcia.
The second guy we'll get to is Lucas Sims, another trade deadline acquisition. I think, the ERA 6.92 through 13 innings. The numbers are the numbers. I think he pitched a little bit better than that. But there was some excitement over the guy they gave up for him, Ovis Portes. I know he's 19. I know that you always say that's a total lottery ticket, but people were surprised that they did that. Sims was not one of the top relievers on the market. He's a guy who's been volatile throughout his career. He came here, another nice guy, good interview. F. Just you can't. These are the guys that you had as your bullpen reinforcements at the deadline, and for them to have ERAs of 9 and 7 and have a month hurt in that process. We'll get to a Breslow grade today too, but on these players for their short stints in Boston, it's got to be an F for me there too.
Yeah, I'd go maybe D minus on Sims. There were some better outings. The problem was strike throwing for him, as it's kind of been
Yep.
for much of his career. Too many walks.
10
Uh,
walks in 13 innings for Sims.
right. Yeah. You know what? You're right. Nice guy, but those numbers represent an F.
Yeah, I was saying Sean's getting softer as your career goes on, but I'm glad you can see the light there. That just I don't like they and to get hurt, both of them. Like you don't fault guys for getting hurt, but and maybe it's more of a Breslow thing. I just think it's just Fs, across the way for those two. We'll get to somebody that you already mentioned, and that is Bailey Horn. Bailey Horn was a guy who made his major league debut this year. A lot of mop-up duty, 18 innings, also a lot of walks, 10, 5 homers, feels like more, 6.50 ERA. A guy that no one really knew much about, but once Bernardino hit the wall and Joely Rodriguez didn't work out, they needed a lefty. He was on the 40-man. Sorry, Bailey. It's an F for you as well.
Can't argue with that. Numbers are not there. The hope was that he was getting a fresh start. There were one or two good outings, as I recall, that he bailed them out of a couple of jams. Has a little life on the fastball, not your typical slop throwing lefty. He's got some pop, but the results are what they are, and they are an F.
Yeah. Again, these are not. It feels harsh, but look at the numbers, and that's kind of all you can, really possibly take away there. So some of these guys we're going to talk about kind of through the prism of the first half and the second half, because a lot of them were excellent in the first half and terrible in the second half. Some of them went the other way, but generally, the fade came in August. This guy doesn't necessarily fit in this that category, but is a guy that we did grade. I'm looking at your grades that you wrote at the trade or at the All-Star break. Cam Boozer, you gave a B minus then. I would give a B minus now. Not much expected out of him. He had a 3.38 ERA. More strikeouts than innings. He had some pretty good spots, and I think a B minus is fair, but I could see you possibly going lower.
Yeah, I'm going to go straight C. I just don't think he was reliable on that spot. A couple of good outings here or there, but lacked the consistency that you look for in guys that you're going to in the bullpen. So I go straight C.
Zach Kelly was an absolute darling of our midseason grades. You gave him a straight A and said he's been highly reliable and extraordinarily tough to hit. You saw the numbers throughout. And then, of course, he, like a lot of these guys did, hit the wall extremely hard in the second half. In the first half, he had an ERA of 178 in more than 35 innings. In the second half, an ERA approaching 8, 759, 18 earned runs, 6 homers, 24 hits, and 21 and a third. Talk about a tale of two seasons. You have to wonder about innings total for a guy coming off the elbow surgery that he had last year. I'll give Zach a B minus for the season. It's kind of right in between the A for the first half and the F for the second. And I think that he would say the same because of what he did, and obviously was optioned in New York a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I think C minus is right on.
I had B minus. Are you going with C minus?
Oh, yeah. I mean, an ERA of almost 4. Some of that is the really poor second half where he just seemed to give up a lot of loud contact. Didn't look like the same guy, whether it was a physical issue or not. Let's say straight C, because he was so good in the first half, but unreliable after the break. C.
Josh Winkowski was a guy who stepped up last year and had a really, really good year out of the bullpen. He did kind of quietly at this point give the Red Sox 73 and a third innings. The ERA is 4.05. He started 6 games, 38 appearances in total, a FIP of 449. I would have, if you were to give me, 405 as Winkowski's ERA this year, I would have guessed it was much higher. He's only striking out 6.8 per nine. The whip is kind of high, almost 1.4. I'd give him a C minus for the season just because the eye test I don't think really, matches what the ERA would say.
Yeah, I go a little higher C because he gave them or served them in a lot of roles, including 6 starts, some of which were openers, others were more traditional starts. He closed out a couple of games. He got used in high leverage. He was used for multiple inning mop ups. So he kind of gave his body up for the team. The results weren't always great, but I'm going to say straight C.
And a guy that, his future will be interesting moving forward as well. Talk about hitting the wall. We have a lefty, another really nice guy, and I'll let you grade him first. Brendan Bernardino had a 273 in the first half and a 591 in the second half. Talk about a lot of loud contact, a lot of bad moments, and a whip approaching 2 in the second half, even though he did strike out. This is a guy that, let's see what you gave him in the first half, Sean. Probably, yep, a straight A, because he was so dominant for so long through May and June and into July. But from the second that Freddie Freeman homer left the bat, it was just downhill, and he ends the season on the IL. How would you grade him?
I would go C minus. Maybe D plus, but again, there's a nice story there about him kind of establishing himself in his late 20s. I think he got a raw deal being sent down early in the season, overcame a couple of injuries and a few other options to Worcester and came back, but clearly didn't pitch well in the second half. C minus.
Well, in the first half, think about how much he pitched. 33 games in the first half, and he had an ERA of 1.69. They went to him a lot, and then once the second half started, he hit the wall hard. And seems like that happened with a lot of guys. You have to wonder if that's a team thing, of pushing these guys too much, a lack of depth. For that, I'm a little more generous on Bernardino with a B minus. Greg Weissert has actually gone the other way compared to how a lot of these guys have, and a story that people have started to talk about a little bit in the last couple weeks. He was really good at the beginning of the year, at the very beginning of the year, hit the wall very hard, and has come and been really really good. I think since coming back in August. We'll look at the numbers here real fast. Since being promoted on August 20th, he has 14 and two-thirds scoreless innings, 9 strikeouts, a FIP of 2.55. The guys are still hitting 270 off of him, but he's obviously no earned runs. That speaks for itself, limiting the walks. An interesting guy who, is going to fall in the kind of the range of where we thought he might. Where do you have Greg Weissert as the season wraps?
I think, maybe it's recency bias, but the way he has responded here in late August and into September, I will give him an overall C plus.
I have a B minus. I thought you were going to go way higher than that based on the lead in, but fair is fair. We get to the back end of the bullpen now. We'll spend a little bit more time on these guys than I know we went rapid fire through a lot of them. But the big three at the back of the bullpen, you know them. They are the law firm of Slayton, Martin, and Jansen. All, had, I think, pretty good years overall. We'll start with Chris Martin, the guy who told Chris Smith that he plans on pitching one more season after this one, a guy who has been through, and it's been an extremely eventful year for Chris Martin. Multiple stints on the injured list. Obviously, one was with anxiety. We've talked a lot about that. A guy who, could really only go backwards in terms of his numbers from what they were last year. But, he is back to doing that thing where he doesn't walk anybody at all. He's given up 3 walks throughout the entire season in 43 innings. The strikeout numbers aren't insane. He does have 49. There were a couple homers early, a couple, some big interleague games in May. It's an interesting case and a guy that I think we should not judge up against the season he had last year. But if you look at it, it's still a pretty good season, a 3.53 ERA, but a 2.75 FIP. a 10.2 strikeout per nine, which is higher than it was last year. Again, the three, or I guess sorry, he has 8 walks, but no, he has 3 walks total and one intentionally. He has 2 walks on the year, which is absolutely
Well,
ridiculous.
the walk went Tuesday night in Toronto was his first since April.
Yeah,
I'm
ridiculous.
sorry, that's stunning.
Yep.
I can't wrap my head around that. That you can, and I know there are a couple of IL stints in there, but still, for a guy who's made what 50 something appearances,
44.
okay, but to go 5 months in between walks at the big league level and high leverage spots, uh, uh, that one is just impossible to explain, and it speaks to the precision and the command that he has. It was a down year by any measure, even if we're not using last year as the standard to measure against. I'm going to say straight B.
Yeah, I have a B as well. I mean, if you look at, I think FIP is a good indicator. The ERA last year, the ERA was 105. Now it's 353. The FIP last year was 244. The FIP this year is 275. Like, that's kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
And the strikeout numbers are higher. I wouldn't say it's a bad year. There was a lot going on, and I have a B as well. We'll get to Justin Slayton, who is the rookie Rule 5 reliever. If the Red Sox do one thing well, it's finding these rookie relievers, Garrett Whitlock, or Rule 5 relievers, Garrett Whitlock, and now Justin Slayton. He's a guy that also, since coming back from the injured list, he came back August 26th. And since then, he has a 1.54 ERA, 13 strikeouts, 2 earned runs, and 11 and 2/3. The body of work, even though he missed, 6 weeks, a lot of innings for a rookie, 54 and a third. They haven't used him in multi-inning appearances since he's been back, but that's something he did earlier in the season. A 2.98 ERA, a 2.59 FIP, electric stuff. He was dominant at the beginning, and a guy that, I think they think might have closer makeup moving forward. For that, I know that the numbers are maybe similar to Martin in some ways. The ERA is better. The FIP is right around the same. And the strikeouts are, a little tick lower. But expectations, you don't know what you're going to get from a Rule 5 guy, and therefore he gets an A minus.
Yeah, I think A minus is spot on. That's where I was going. To me, it's incredible that these guys, we say Rule 5, and you don't really think about that. But let's start with, not only is he a rookie, but most of those Rule 5 guys have not pitched above AA, never
Yep.
mind
He had,
the big leagues.
and we've said this before, 8 1/3 innings at AAA ever. And that was last year for him.
Yeah. Astonishing to step into some high leverage roles as a rookie with no big league experience at all and last the year A minus.
Kenley Jansen, his year's over, so we don't have a chance of these numbers blowing up in our face because he has shoulder something, doesn't want to be with the team anymore injury. So um, love him, but it was time for him to be done in the mind of shit and the mind of
Henley
him.
was not running through the tape at the finish line.
Yeah, that's fair. But they sold him a bill of goods on contention, so choose your fighter there. 3.29 ERA, a FIP of 3. He was 27 for 31 in save appearances or save chances. He gave them 55 innings or 54 and 2/3. Strikeout numbers were good. Had 62 of them. Are these the years where he had an ERA under 2 like he did 3 times between 13 and 17? No, but this has been, the pitcher he's been really for the last 7 years, an ERA around 3, converts all of his save chances, strikes a bunch of guys out, sometimes really turns it on 1, 2, 3 innings. I think the converted saves to me is more important than whatever the ERA is with a guy like that. And in both years, I think last year he was 29 to 33, this year 27 to 31. Probably could have had a case to be an all-star this year, was last year. A character for sure. He gets a B plus for me.
Yeah, I think you could go B plus A minus. I was kind of toggling back and forth on that. Despite the ERA being a little higher, and we know that with a closer, a couple of bad outings can lift that up. But to me, as you noted, all but 4 saves converted, willing to go more than an inning a few times. So I'm going A minus.
two things on Kenley Jansen because we are assuming that this is the end of his Red Sox tenure. Number one, his tenure it will go down as underrated by Red Sox fans and people who remember it. And when you're a closer on a bad team, maybe that happens. But like I said, the saves converted was big. Um, he had a 329 FIP during that time. He gave them 100 innings over 2 years. Was an all-star once, could have been twice. Like, it was a pretty good 2 years, and he was worth the money. He was worth the 32 million. Also, there's a contingent of Red Sox fans that are mad at Kenley Jansen for saying the exact same things they say on Twitter, which is hilarious to me. He says we don't compete. You're not a team player, or he says they sold me a bill of goods. Why are you complaining now? Well, he's right, number one, and all the fans that are mad at him for saying that have been saying the exact same things. He does have kind of the background and the resume to say whatever the hell he wants. He's 36, 37 years old. He's a four-time All-Star. He's a World Series champion. He signed here to compete. The Yankees offered him, I think, exactly the same what the Red Sox did when he was a free agent. He chose the Red Sox at that point because Heim said, hey, in year two, we're going to be really, really good. John Henry then pulled the budget. Kenley Jansen was kind of like clearly wanting a trade. And you know what? They actually kind of pulled one over on him, and he was clear about that. And so I don't fault him for being vocal. Filed under GFB, great for business for us, obviously, because guys sometimes aren't willing to say the quiet part out loud. But in addition to that, like I said, pretty good career if that is it for him in Boston.
Yeah, and likely headed to the Hall of Fame. I mean, he's going to get close to 500 saves. He's at 447. It's not hard to imagine 2 more years of 25 to 30 saves. That gets him over 500 for his career. Only 3 others have done that. I would expect that he's going to go to Cooperstown. People will not associate the Red Sox with him, certainly not primarily. He'll be thought of as a Dodger, as he should, given the success and the number of years. And who knows, maybe there's another time with the Dodgers coming up still. He could have a number of suitors over the offseason, but I think it's safe to assume these guys will not be one of them. And even if they were, he would pick elsewhere.
An extremely fun guy to cover from my perspective, too.
Yeah.
So that's
accountable, funny, and competitive.
And I didn't cover Ortiz, but there have been a lot of comps just in the personality between the two from the writers over the last 2 years as well.
Yep.
So that's Jansen, and that's the bullpen in total.
Right down to not knowing the names of teammates.
Yeah, exactly, or reporters. So there you go. We'll move on now to the starting rotation, and I hesitate to do this, and for 2 reasons. Number one, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon, pulling back the curtain, and Richard Fitz could have the worst start in baseball history tonight. And it could change everything by the time you listen to this in the morning, and we post it in the morning. And Sean's traveling as you listen to this probably, and we can't do the pod while he's on the plane, especially Porter. They don't have Wi-Fi. But we're going to get into Richard Fitz very briefly. 3 starts, no earned runs, 15 2/3 innings. I mean, I'll give him the earliest A of all time. He's done great. That's not a season-long A. That's a 3-week-long A, but good for him.
Yeah, look, when you've gone more than 15 innings over 3 outings and haven't allowed an earned run, how can it be anything other than an A? We'll see where he, pardon the pun, fits in going forward, and
nice. Good job.
Whether he's part of the rotation next year or starts the year in Worcester and serves as depth, or maybe is a long guy and a swing man out of the bullpen.
Traded in a package for Scooble.
May I finish without the running commentary in the background?
Well, they should trade him. They should really jump on this hot start and trade him. But go ahead.
Anyway, I believe he has an A.
Great. We move on to Tar Heel, Cooper Criswell.
Yeah, I'm sorry to take so much of your time up there.
Well, I said he's gotten 3 starts. I wanted to pay it the due it deserves, but not go on all day, which you're more than capable of doing. Cooper Criswell from the University of North Carolina and the Boston Red Sox. He's given them like 100 innings, 99 1/3. He gave them 18 starts, which you would have expected the under heading into the year. The ERA is not crazy. 4.08. The FIP is right around there. The strikeout numbers are low. He limited hard contact. He kept them in games. And for a 1 year, $1 million deal, he gave them kind of what you'd want and probably a little bit more. I know there were really good outings, there were really bad ones, but for a spot starter, six starter type, I'll give Cooper Criswell a B plus. And it's a guy that, they're going to tender a contract and he's going to be a piece of the mix moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting guy and at times outperformed expectations, I think. I think you're being a little generous, and I can't for the life of me think about what might be behind that. But to me, you can't get a B plus with an ERA over 4. I'm going to say a B minus, but a surprise contributor and a potential piece moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's even less about alma mater, I swear, and more about just kind of like the expectations, which were zero for this guy, and he you give them 100 innings of pretty serviceable to me, like that's better than, a guy who was expected to be excellent having those numbers. And that's where my grade goes. We'll go to Nick Pivetta next. He is a guy who has been known as an innings eater throughout his career, and he's going to finish fourth on the Red Sox in innings, which is interesting, way behind Crawford, Houck, and Bayo with one start to go on Friday night. Nick Pivetta entering his last start is giving them 139 innings. He's 6-11 with a 4.21 ERA. The FIP is right around there. The strikeout numbers 10-7, high as always. If you look at it, this is I would say, because he's had such a weird career in the 4+ seasons he's been here, right around where you'd expect him. I would say the eye test probably suggests that it was a little bit worse than the numbers would, just because there was inexplicable blowups and all the time. This is a guy that, to me, I just don't think the Red Sox should re-sign. Some other team's going to fall in love with the metrics and the strikeout numbers and the swing and miss and the stuff and overpay without having actually watched it every 5 days for 4 years. They I just wouldn't re-sign him for a variety of reasons. And I think this season was, frankly, not very good. I just don't think that he, despite the 4.21 ERA, pitched very well for the Red Sox throughout the season. So he gets a C. There's a lot of expectations and a platform year for him. Maybe he steps up, but he didn't, and that's what that is.
He is what he is, which is a guy that takes the ball, usually stays healthy, though that wasn't the case as much this year. The problem is you never know what version of Nick Pivetta you're going to get when you send him out there. Is this going to be 7 innings with 9 strikeouts, or is he going to get lit up and be gone by the 4th inning? There were too many of those of the latter. So I'm saying he's slightly below average. I give him a C minus.
Yeah, I mean he pitched, he went at least 6 in 12 different starts, but he didn't get through 5 8 times, including, massive blowouts, all against National League teams in Colorado, against the Brewers, against the Padres, against the Phillies, against the Braves. So, National League GMs must be salivating. But yeah, I just think, expectations have been high for him for so long. And the way I've always put it, consistently inconsistent. We've seen the no-hit stuff. He flirts with a no-hitter more than any, number 3 starter in the history of baseball. At the same time, the blowouts come too, or the blow-ups. And, if I were the Red Sox, I'd, potentially relying on Giolito as your innings eater and knowing they need front end help, move on and let some other team overpay. That's what
I
don't
see them showing any aggressiveness at all to retain him, nor should they.
So that's Pivetta. We get to the 3 homegrown guys. The last 3 we're going to touch on before we get to Cora and before we get to Breslow. Brian Bayo has made 30 starts for the Red Sox, 162 and a third, a 4.49 ERA. The 4.19 FIP suggests it's a little bit better. The 8.5 strikeouts per 9, I believe, is up from last year. It is. That was 7.6. He was terrible for a stretch, and then he kind of got better in the second half, or got maybe significantly better, let's say, in the second half. In his last 10 or so starts, his ERA is right around 10. His second half ERA, a 3.47 in 13 games. And they were 20 and 10 in his starts, which is, Eduardo Rodriguez used to have that type of luck too, where, no matter how he pitches, they figure out a way to win. Um, this is an expectations versus reality case, and the opposite of what I was talking about with Cooper Criswell. This was the year he was going to take a step forward. And by every metric, if you look at compared to 2023, it was a step backward. Was it absolutely horrible? No. Is it better that he kind of surged toward the end compared to the beginning? Definitely. But a C plus, I think, because there was so much hype. The guy's got 376 innings of major league experience under his belt. Maybe next year is where he takes that Houck leap that we saw this year. To me, it's a disappointment no matter how you cut it, no matter the win total, no matter the surge in the second half, of C plus.
Yeah, it's incredible that he had a chance to go out and win his 15th game on Tuesday night.
Mm-hmm.
That is no way indicative of how well he pitched. It's a reminder that one loss remains one of the more deceiving elements of a starting pitcher's statistical profile. He was not nearly as good as you would think for somebody who won 14 or 15 games. The ERA at 4.5 is above league average. Again, another guy inconsistent. And the thing that bothered me was the inefficiency. And that was also on full display Tuesday night. He threw, I don't know, 58 pitches through 4 innings. Can't do that. And he did it too often. I'm going C minus.
Yeah, and there's a 37 pitch inning in there too. I think the other thing, and this has been touched on, like just, you know, it's not often you see a major leaguer get rattled and know what's coming next. Like these guys are the best of the best. And especially earlier in the year, you saw that a little too much. And so, yeah, I think it's in the realm of, I had C minus. So, that I think is fair. We'll go to Kutter Crawford now, which Kutter Crawford is a guy that I know you and Smith were super high on heading into the year. And in a year where Tanner Houck's gotten, all the flowers for taking a step forward, I think it's interesting to have that discussion on Crawford. 32 starts, leads the league, 179 in the third inning with one more to go. He's obviously given up a lot of home runs, 33 leads the league. A 4.17 ERA, a 4.61 FIP, which is way higher than last year's, which is 3.83 in 129 innings. I don't know why I feel this way on Crawford because the home run total in that stretch in the middle was so bad. But I am toying with a B for him just because I think it was a pretty good year outside of like a few horrendous starts where he gave up like 12 homers in 3 games.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, well, are you going B?
Yeah.
I'm going to go C plus. He deserves credit for going deeper into games. That was his primary focus. He talked about all spring training, building up his lower half, getting stronger to be able to power through games. He did that far better as the innings total reflects. But the home runs are a huge issue and have to be corrected. You cannot give up 3, 4, 5 home runs as he did at times in individual outings. A step forward, but I think he can still be better, but I'll give him a C plus.
Pavetta gave up 28 homers this year, which that's not a headline usually because Crawford gave up 33, but that's something I noticed when I was looking at this as well. We'll go last to Tanner Houck. He was an all-star. He was an absolute A at the beginning of the year. And he hit some bumps along the way, but he is going to, make 31 starts with a 3.12 ERA as we have this conversation. 178 and 2/3 innings. Talk about, home runs. He leads the league with the lowest homers per 9 at 0.6. He's only given up 11 on the season. People forget this is a guy that had to fight for a spot in spring training. He had a 5 ERA last year in 21 starts. I know you think and wrote that last year a huge reason for their downturn was they got nothing out of Houck and Whitlock. This year he was everything they could have asked for and more. I know the second half splits are not as crazy good as they were in the first, just because at a certain point, like you're not going to have a 2.54 ERA. But in the second half, of 4.23 is not horrible. It kept him above water, and a 3.1 at this point. Like, you just have to look at the whole thing and appreciate what he's done. To me, it's an A minus.
Yeah, I agree. A minus, can't go straight A. A couple of things um, concern me going forward. One is the inability to miss bats. I know that he is pitching to contact and getting a lot of weak contact, as he did in Toronto the other night with a ton of ground balls and some empty fly balls. I just worry about a guy that has the ball put in play so much, particularly with a team that has some defensive shortcomings the way this one does. We know their unearned runs allowed was ridiculously high. Somehow Houck didn't often pay for that as a guy who allows the ball to be put in play a lot, but he's got a top, 6 or 7 ERA in the American League, made every start basically, had one push back a little bit that could have changed that total by one. But when you're in the low threes and take the ball better than 30 times and get over 180 innings, you've done your job. Not a Cy Young caliber guy, but an A minus.
Yeah, and again, when you look at how he came into the year, having to fight for a spot, and probably the chance he wouldn't have made the rotation if Giolito didn't get hurt, like, take it all day long. That's the pitching staff. We have two more very important people to get to. They are Alex Cora and Craig Breslow. Um, these are complicated ones and ones that I haven't thought long and hard about, but um, I think you generally more than me are more focused on the effect a manager can have just for seeing it so long covering the game. Alex Cora had a big year. He signed his extension. But again, they fell in the second half. So how would you assess his performance in 2024?
Yeah, I thought they played harder in September this year than they did the previous 2 years. I think Cora refrained from bemoaning a lack of upgrades at the deadline the way he did the last 2 years, which I think negatively impacted the team and almost gave them permission to play poorly as they started to fall out of contention. Those last 2 years, they finished with a little more kick. The very fact that they're, still mathematically alive with 4 games to go speaks to his leadership. A couple of things I didn't like. I thought he got way too infatuated with left-right matchups in the second half. To me, even if Wilyer Abreu is struggling against a lefty, he's a better bet than Nick Sogard is, or somebody of that ilk to give you a hit. And I thought that Cora sometimes relied too much on those splits and left-right matchups. I as we look back, we can say maybe he worked the bullpen a little too aggressively in the first half, and that resulted in some of the downturn that we saw. But in general, a pretty good year managing for Cora. Hard to say that about a team that doesn't get into the postseason and is not, as we speak, guaranteed of finishing with a winning record, but we're kind of splitting hairs there. I'm going to give him a B.
Yeah, I have B minus, just because it's you have to show that your team's not going to fade in the second half. And we obviously blamed him for part of the last 2 years. The second half record probably going to be worse, right, this year than it was in the last two. I don't have that in front of me, but just looking at it, and also, all of the things that he talked about being really important for the Red Sox throughout the season, like winning at Fenway, where they are 37-41 heading into this weekend. Playing well against good teams, where they're 39-57 against teams above 500. Playing well against your division, where they are even, but the division's a little bit down. I think that he's identified a lot of things and said we have to get better. We have no choice. Another one right at the top of the list: infield defense, 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 defense. They can't figure it out. At a certain point, you can switch as many infield coaches as you want. Like, they can't figure it out. Runners or putting the ball in play drives them absolutely crazy. They strike out too much, you know. So with that, a B minus. I think he got the most out of them for the first half. All these grades would be different if, and as I said the other day on the pod, like if they were rising in the second half instead of faltering. If the first half was bad and the second half, and you carry momentum into next year, these grades all go up. To me, when it goes the other way, it's I think more impactful. So for that, a B minus. Craig Breslow is the last name we're going to get to. Um, and as I was kind of looking at this, you kind of look at the roster and you look at the body of work. And so let's start with this exercise, Sean, as we get into Breslow. Who is the in-season pickup for the Red Sox that gave them the most this year? And why is the answer Dominic Smith?
Yeah. I thought that Breslow did a better job than Heim Bloom reacting to injuries in season. When it was clear they needed help at first base in 24 and 23, I thought Heim Bloom took too long to try to address that, and it just festered and got worse. I give Breslow credit for not waiting around and going out and getting Garrett Cooper and Dom Smith. Cooper didn't do much of anything. Smith did, had a OPS north of 750 for much of his time here. Good citizen, good guy, popular guy, leader. All those things worked out, but that was a failing, and so certainly was the deadline. Even if we cut him a break for not anticipating that Paxton's going to have a calf muscle tear on a routine play in front of the mound, there's no way you can anticipate that. I thought that was a good move. I didn't think getting Sims and Garcia were bad moves. I didn't think they were necessarily impact guys, but we know the price for real quality relievers at the deadline was extraordinarily high. They were, again, it could go either way sort of team at the deadline, so you don't want to give away too much for rentals. Danny Jansen, I didn't understand at the time, and it made less sense when you're looking back on how he performed.
Right, and that could be a legitimate overpay too.
It might be. Yeah, there's some interesting guys that they gave up to get him, and Jansen was a disaster. Nice guy, did a decent job handling the pitching staff, defensively at least adequate, but the talk that he was going to be the righty bat who broke the wall down with all those whole side line drives, it never came close to happening. It's hard to assess a GM. Do you count the off season? Do you count
Well, with him, we don't count the offseason because that's a Henry project.
Well, but even if that were not the issue, I thought the Verdugo trade worked out well. I think a bag of balls for Alex Verdugo might have worked out well given what they got rid of and the headaches that they rid themselves of. And when you think about Fitz and maybe Weissert being a serviceable reliever going forward, that's a pretty good return. The Chris Sale trade was disastrous, not because Chris Sale was much better than anyone anticipated. That's beyond your grasp and scope, but because Vaughn Grissom was such a disappointment in return. Too soon to say he can't contribute and be a part going forward, but a disaster of a first year here, as we noted the other day on the position player pod. So if we're balancing all that out, I guess that comes down to about a C for Craig Breslow.
I'm harsher. I give him a D just because I think as time's gone on and like Garcia and Sims could have been elite. Fine, whatever. The Paxton trade and the Priester and York trade, I'm going to put those over there. Jansen, Sims, and Garcia, there's a chance that somebody they gave up for those guys is going to be pretty good. Kutter Coffee could be that guy. Fortes could be that guy. I don't think it's going to be Cavadas or Zephyr John. Matthew Lugo, maybe. Who knows? Probably not. But if one of those guys turns out to be anything, this deadline is going to be looked at like an all-time cluster. And you have that, hand in hand with the Sale Grissom trade, where, Atlanta, I think, was happier to let Grissom go based on some conversations than I've had. Then, maybe they let on. Um, I'll give him the O'Neill trade and the Verdugo trade. The Criswell signing was good. There's some pieces around the margins that were fine, but the trade deadline has the chance to be historically bad if any of those guys turn out. And I don't count York, of course. I already said that, and I don't fault him for Paxton. Another thing that I think was just trying to plug um, some holes throughout the year with some of these guys, the Bailey Horns of the world, for a day, Johan Ramirez, but even Rich Hill, God love him, trying to do that and trying to, make that happen and not being willing to pull up some of these guys from the farm that are not top prospects. They're older prospects, but it took forever to get them up here. Penrod should have come up when Hill did. Guerrero shouldn't have had to wait for Rich Hill to be DFA'd to come up. Like I'm sorry, the Luis Guerrero throwing 99 is going to give you a better chance against anybody than Rich Hill throwing 88. Again, love him. Can't wait to have him guest speak in my BC class in a few weeks. And he's the greatest guy on earth. But at this point, he would probably tell you that too. And I just think there was kind of this hesitation to call up, not your blue chip prospects, but some of these guys that, and I've talked about this before, why did it take so long to try out Nick Sogard? What the hell does it matter if it doesn't work out? Like he's like my age, and some of these other guys, Penrod, being one of them, Guerrero, throughout, Mickey Gasper doesn't count, but you know what I'm saying? We saw too many of the, Jamie Westbrook types and Zach Short and these guys who have, they don't have the upside. Just give me some guys with the upside when you have the holes. And I think he was, too careful trying to react for some reason. I don't know why we're hesitant to start the service clock on, Zach Penrod, who is, let's check, going to be 28 in June, right? Like there's just what's the difference between they get protected about 40-man spots. You give me the 40-man roster right now and get rid of 10 guys in 10 seconds. We can do that every single fall with this team because of the way it is. Henry deserves all the blame, I think, from the top down for the whole way the operation goes. We've covered that a lot last offseason. I expect to do the same depending on what they do. But, I don't think that the season was a great one for Craig Breslow, and therefore he gets a D.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably, I could go C minus there. I think that there were other things that he did well. I think hiring Andrew Bailey was a smart thing, even if the pitching fell off in the second half. The very fact that the rotation is going to have a top 6 ERA in either league is a huge step forward from a year ago. I think Bailey's impact will continue to be felt going forward, not just at the big league level, but the pitching program that he puts in place for the organization. So I give him some credit there. Look, when you finish right around 500, then your GM or CBO or whatever you want to call him didn't do enough. I didn't think he was horrible. We'll have a little bit more runway to grade him after this upcoming off season when he is not kind of playing from behind, starting the job in November and trying to catch up.
Yeah, and look, Chaim Bloom defined his legacy on in his first offseason by trading Mookie, and the rest was kind of like fans didn't really care. Breslow had an offseason where everybody knew his hands were tied. He did O'Neill, he did Sale, he did all these things fine on the margins, and the same at the deadline. This deadline last offseason, they're not going to define his legacy. This offseason might, because there's a lot on the table, a lot that we will get to in the future on the Fenway Rundown. Season wraps up this week. Site, pod, and drum roll, please, the Fenway Rundown Insider Text Program,
which you can join by texting the word join to 617-751-6257. Then click the link to subscribe. It'll cost you $4.99 per month after that, and you'll tell friends it is the best investment under $5 you have ever made.
We'll be back next week. If we are in a city covering a playoff game, something's gone crazy for the Red Sox, but we expect to wrap up the end of season press conference. Always an exciting event as we turn the page toward 2025 early next week.